5 minutes. That was the price of my father's legacy. He didn't look at my eyes, he looked at my stomach. "You're ruining the silhouette," he said, his voice flat. "The photographer is setting up for the annual portrait. You have 5 minutes to leave. Use the service door." It was 10 degrees below zero in Chicago. A blizzard was burying the driveway. But Richard Sterling didn't care about the cold, he cared about the picture. So I didn't beg. I walked out into the snow, wearing nothing but a silk dress, and the weight of the family name I was about to freeze to death in. "I need to ask you something personal right now. If you had to choose between your family's reputation and your own child's safety, which would you pick? Drop a safety or reputation in the comments. I want to see where we stand." The cold wasn't just a temperature, it was a verdict. Chicago in December doesn't care about your bloodline or your bank account. It only cares about how fast it can stop your heart. I walked past the iron gates of the estate, my heels sinking into 6 inches of fresh powder. The silk dress, that was supposed to look elegant in a family portrait, felt like tissue paper against the wind. I couldn't feel my toes. Then, I couldn't feel my feet. I knew if I stopped moving, I would simply become a frozen statue on the side of the road. A cautionary tale for the morning news. I saw it rising out of the gray haze like a skeleton, the steel ribs of a high-rise construction site about 3 blocks away. It was an unfinished luxury condo project, a rival development my father had laughed about over dinner just the night before. He called it a money pit. To me, it looked like a lifeline. I scrambled over a low section of the chain-link fence, the metal tearing the hem of my dress. I didn't care. I stumbled toward the ground floor, guided by the mechanical hum of a portable generator. I found a gap in the heavy plastic sheeting and squeezed through. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and dust. But the wind was gone. I huddled next to the generator, pressing my hands against the vibrating metal casing, trying to steal its heat. I was shaking so violently my teeth clicked together. I curled into a ball on a stack of drywall, closing my eyes, waiting for the security guards, or the police, or the end. "Hey, who's there?" The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, blinding me. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs were dead weight. A man stepped into the circle of light. He was older, wearing a battered hard hat and a heavy canvas jacket stained with grease. He looked at me, a pregnant teenager in a ruined cocktail dress, shivering on a construction site, and he didn't reach for his radio. He didn't call the cops. He lowered the light. "Jesus, kid," he rasped. He took off his jacket. It was heavy, smelling of diesel and old tobacco. And when he wrapped it around my shoulders, it was the only thing in the world that mattered. He unscrewed the top of a steel thermos and poured steaming black liquid into the lid. "Drink," he ordered, handing it to me, slowly. His name was Arthur. He was the night foreman, a man who had spent 40 years pouring foundations for people like my father to walk on. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask what I had done to deserve the cold. He just sat on an overturned bucket across from me and kept watch while I thawed out. My father had looked at his own flesh and blood and seen a liability to be discarded. This stranger looked at an intruder and saw a human being to be saved. As the feeling returned to my hands, gripping that thermos like a lifeline, I knew 2 things. First, I was going to survive this night. And second, I was going to make sure the Sterling family paid for every single second I spent shivering in the dark. I didn't go to a shelter. I didn't call a crisis hotline. I went to work. Arthur got me a job off the books, sweeping debris at the site for minimum wage. I lived in a utility trailer on the edge of the lot, sleeping on a cot Arthur found in a dumpster. When Noah was born 3 months later, he didn't come home to a nursery painted in soft pastels. He came home to the sound of jackhammers and the smell of wet cement. For the first 5 years, my life was a blur of exhaustion and grit. I worked days on the site, learning the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade. At night, while Noah slept in an open filing drawer lined with blankets, I studied by the light of a camping lantern. I devoured textbooks on structural engineering, urban planning, and contract law. I didn't just want to build buildings, I wanted to understand the skeleton of the city. My parents had taught me how to host a gala. Arthur taught me how to pour concrete so it wouldn't crack under pressure. He taught me that a foundation is only as good as the dirt you dig out first. And he taught me something else, too. There's an old saying that blood is thicker than water. It's a lie toxic families tell you to keep you in line. They use blood like a chain, binding you to their dysfunction. But I learned the truth in that construction trailer. Arthur wasn't my blood. He was a stranger who owed me nothing. Yet, when Noah took his first steps on the dusty linoleum of that trailer, Arthur was the one cheering. When I passed my certification exams, Arthur was the one who bought a cupcake with a single candle. My parents shared my DNA, but they would have let us freeze. Arthur shared his warmth. That's the difference between biology and family. The water of the womb is nothing compared to the blood of the covenant, the bonds you choose when you're in the trenches. By the time Noah was 10, I wasn't sweeping floors anymore. I was running crews. By 15, I was bidding on my own contracts. I didn't use the name Sterling. I buried that name. I founded Onyx Developments. It was a ghost firm. A labyrinth of shell companies designed to keep my identity hidden. I didn't build vanity projects like my father. I bought undervalued, distressed properties, the ugly, broken parts of the city that people like Richard Sterling ignored. I fixed them. I optimized them. I turned rust into gold, while the Sterling Group was leveraging themselves to the hilt to build glass towers they couldn't fill. I was quietly buying the city block by block. I became a phantom in the industry. A rumor. They called me the Iron Lady of Chicago. But nobody knew my face. I watched my parents' empire stagnate from a distance. I watched them make bad deal after bad deal, their arrogance blinding them to the rot in their own foundation. 20 years passed in a blink. I wasn't the shivering girl in the snow anymore. I was the one controlling the thermostat. And Noah? He didn't just survive the construction site. He absorbed it. He saw the city as a code to be cracked. While I built the hardware, he built the software. By 20, he had patented an AI-driven energy grid system that could cut a skyscraper's operating costs by 40%. It was a unicorn patent, the kind of tech that could save a dying real estate empire, or destroy it. A building can look perfect on the outside, while the rebar inside is rusting to dust. It's called concrete cancer. By the time you see the cracks on the surface, the structural integrity is already gone. That was the Sterling Group 20 years later. To the public, they were still titans of Chicago real estate. But I had the blueprints of their finances. I knew they were overleveraged, bleeding cash, and desperate. Their flagship project, the Sterling Tower, was a billion-dollar glass needle looking for a vein. But the operating costs were eating them alive. They needed a miracle, and they found one in TechCrunch. Noah's face was plastered on the homepage. The 20-year-old architect of the future. His AI-driven energy grid patent was valued at numbers that made Richard Sterling's eyes water. They didn't know he was the baby who slept in a filing cabinet. They didn't know I was the shadow investor backing him. They just saw the last name, my maiden name, which Noah had reclaimed for professional irony, and they smelled blood. They reached out within hours of the article going live. Not to me. To Noah's public email. A formal invitation to the Sterling Tower dedication gala. We would be honored to host a pioneer of industry. The email read, and to reconnect with family. It was breathtakingly audacious. It was also clinically fascinating. I watched the news clip of my father announcing the gala. He looked older, his hair thinner, but the arrogance was untouched. He spoke about legacy and family bonds. He didn't look like a man haunted by the memory of casting his pregnant daughter into a blizzard. He looked peaceful. Psychologists call it the erasure mechanism. It's a survival tactic for the narcissist. When they commit an act of cruelty that conflicts with their self-image as the good person, their brain simply deletes the footage. They overwrite the file. In Richard and Patricia's version of history, they didn't kick me out. I ran away. I was the troubled teenager who rejected their help. I was the ungrateful liability who abandoned them. They hadn't spent 20 years grieving. They hadn't spent a single second feeling guilty. They had simply edited me out of the script to protect their fragile egos. They genuinely believed their own lie. That's what made them dangerous. They weren't walking into this meeting feeling remorse. They were walking in feeling entitled. They thought they were the benevolent patriarchs opening the door to a prodigal grandson. They thought they were the sharks. They didn't realize they were just chum. They want a meeting before the gala, Noah said, tossing his tablet onto my desk. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and devoid of sentiment. He didn't see grandparents. He saw a hostile takeover target. They want to discuss synergies regarding the patent. Of course they do, I said, leaning back in my chair. They need your tech to retrofit their tower. It's the only way they get their occupancy permit approved by the city. So, what's the play? Noah asked. I looked at the invitation. Heavy cardstock. Gold leaf. The same font they used on the Christmas cards they stopped sending 2 decades ago. We accept, I said. But we don't go as family. We go as investors. They want a partnership? Let's give them one they can't sign their way out of. The call came at 9 a.m. and sharp. It was Trevor. 20 years ago. He was the boy who promised to drive me to the clinic and then ghosted me when his father threatened to cut his allowance. Now, he was the vice president of acquisitions for the Sterling Group. This is the office of Onyx Developments. I answered. I didn't use a voice changer. I didn't need to. The frightened girl he knew whispered. The woman I had become spoke in capital letters. Ms. Onyx. Trevor said. His voice was smooth, polished like cheap brass. I'm calling on behalf of Richard Sterling. We're incredibly excited about the synergies between Noah's patent and our flagship tower. We'd like to arrange a private signing before the gala. Quietly. Quietly? I asked. I leaned back in my leather chair, watching the city skyline. Why quietly? Trevor? Are you afraid the board will find out how much you're overpaying? He laughed. A nervous, stuttering sound. No. No. We just prefer discretion. The Sterling name carries weight. The Sterling name is trading at junk bond status. I said, if you want Noah's tech, you don't get a backroom deal. You get a show. We sign at the gala. On stage. During the dedication, there was a pause. I could hear him calculating. He was thinking about the press coverage, the stock bump, the optics of the great Richard Sterling securing the future of green energy. He walked right into the open door. That could work, he said. Yes, Richard would love that. A passing of the torch moment. Exactly, I said. A torch. I hung up. The trap was set. They were expecting a partnership. I was bringing a demolition crew, but before the gala, I had one final inspection to complete. I opened the encrypted files my forensic accountants had pulled from the Sterling Group's internal servers during our due diligence phase. I was looking for leverage. Debt ratios. Taxes, yeah. I found something much worse. It was a folder labeled Estate Restructuring, 2005. I opened the PDF. It was a court filing. A petition to dissolve the trust fund my grandmother had left for me. The trust I was supposed to access when I turned 21. To access it early, the beneficiary had to be incapacitated or deceased. I scrolled to the bottom. There it was. A death certificate. Zahra Sterling. Deceased in absentia. They hadn't just kicked me out. They hadn't just ignored me. To save their business during a market dip in 2005, they had gone to a judge and legally declared me dead. They told the court I had run away and likely perished in the storm. They had erased my existence to liquidate my assets and pour the money into the foundation of the very tower I was about to walk into. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Richard Sterling. Patricia Sterling. And the witness. Trevor. The coldness in my chest turned into something solid. Something unbreakable. Until this moment. A tiny, foolish part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. If maybe simply succeeding was enough revenge. But looking at that document, seeing the price tag they put on my life, the hesitation vanished. They didn't just steal my childhood, they stole my name. They funded their empire on my ghost. I printed the document. I didn't put it in a folder. I put it in the slide deck for the presentation. I walked out to the balcony where Noah was testing the drone prototype for the evening's light show. "Are we ready?" he asked. "No," I said, holding up the paper. "We're not just ready, we're overdue." The Sterling Tower dedication gala was a masterclass in hubris. The atrium was a cathedral of glass and steel, soaring 50 stories up into the Chicago night. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne that cost more than my first year's rent at the construction site. The elite of the city were their politicians, investors, rivals my father had spent decades trying to crush. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, watching them. Richard and Patricia Sterling were radiant. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations for a building they couldn't afford to keep the lights on in. They touched Noah's arm constantly, parading him around like a trophy. They introduced him not as an independent innovator, but as our grandson, our blood, the heir apparent. It was the erasure mechanism in real time. They had successfully rewritten history. In their minds, the 20-year gap wasn't an abandonment, it was just a pause before the inevitable triumph of their DNA. I adjusted the lapel of my tuxedo jacket. I wasn't wearing a dress tonight. I was wearing armor. Tailored. Black. Sharp enough to cut. "Ladies and gentlemen." Richard's voice boomed over the sound system. The room quieted. He stood on the raised dais, flanked by my mother and Trevor. Noah stood a few feet away, looking bored. "Tonight is not just about a building," Richard said, raising a glass. "It is about the future." For years, people whispered that the Sterling legacy was fading. But tonight, I am proud to introduce the architect of our future. A genius who proves that greatness is in the blood. My grandson, Noah. The applause was polite, but enthusiastic. They bought it. They bought the lie of the benevolent patriarch passing the torch. Noah stepped up to the microphone. He didn't smile. He adjusted the stand, his eyes scanning the room until they found me in the shadows. He gave a barely perceptible nod. "Thank you, Richard," Noah said. His voice was calm, devoid of the warmth they expected. "It's true. This building represents a legacy, but I think there has been a misunderstanding regarding my role here tonight." The room went still. The smile on my mother's face faltered. Just for a fraction of a second. "I am not joining the Sterling Group," Noah continued. "My technology is exclusive to Onyx Developments. And tonight, I am merely here to introduce the person who actually owns the debt on this tower. The person who made this night possible. Please welcome the CEO of Onyx Developments." Noah stepped back. He extended a hand toward the stairs. I stepped into the light. The click of my heels on the marble floor echoed in the silence. I walked up the stairs. My eyes locked on my father. I saw the moment recognition hit him. It wasn't immediate. He was looking for a stranger, a business rival. Then he saw the eyes. He saw the chin. He saw the ghost. His face drained of color. turning a sickly shade of gray. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the past. Trevor took a step back, nearly knocking over a podium. I took the microphone from Noah. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled the smile of a wolf who has finally cornered the sheep. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Father," I said. My voice was amplified, filling the atrium, bouncing off the glass walls. "You look surprised. I suppose you weren't expecting to see me. After all, according to your records, I'm not supposed to be here." "Zahra," my father whispered. The microphone picked it up. It sounded like a prayer for mercy. "You invited us here to sign a partnership," I said, addressing the crowd now. "You wanted to merge our assets. You wanted to claim Noah's success as your own. But there's a small administrative problem we need to clear up first." I pulled a small remote from my pocket. "You see, Richard," I said, turning back to him, "you can't do business with a ghost." I pressed the button. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying the Sterling logo, flickered. Then, it changed. It wasn't a graph. It wasn't a building rendering. It was a document, blown up to 30 feet high. Every pixel sharp and damning. Certificate of death. State of Illinois. Name, Zahra Sterling. Date of death, December 21st, 2005. Cause, presumed exposure, accidental. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. December 21st. I read aloud, my voice cutting through the quiet. "The night of the winter solstice party. The night you told a court I ran away. The night you told a judge I was likely dead so you could dissolve my trust fund and pour the capital into this building." I clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in on the bottom of the document. Petitioner, Richard Sterling. Witness, Trevor Hawthorne. "You didn't just kick a pregnant 17-year-old out into a blizzard," I said, looking at Trevor now. He was shaking, his eyes darting to the exits. "You monetized her death. You built this tower on my grave." A murmur started in the crowd. ALO. Horrified rumble. Phones were out. Cameras were flashing. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a felony fraud broadcast live to the Chicago elite. "That's a lie," my mother shrieked, her composure shattering. "She's lying. She ran away. The court filings are public record." "Patricia," I said coldly. "My forensic accountants pulled them this morning. But that's not the only thing we pulled." I clicked the button one more time. The screen behind me shifted again. The death certificate vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet. It was a complex web of numbers, red lines, and interest rates. But the header was large enough for the back row to read. "Sterling Tower, Debt Acquisition Summary. You always taught me that real estate is about leverage." "Father," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You leveraged everything to build this tower. You leveraged your reputation. You leveraged your liquidity. You even leveraged the legacy of a grandson you had never met." I walked to the edge of the stage. The investors in the front row, men who had known Richard for decades, were leaning forward, reading the data. They knew what they were seeing. They were seeing a corpse. 6 months ago, the Sterling Group's bridge loan for this construction matured. I explained, pointing to the screen. "You couldn't pay it. You were banking on refinancing after tonight's gala, using Noah's patent as collateral. But banks don't lend to sinking ships. They sell the debt to the highest bidder." Richard was gripping the podium so hard his knuckles were white. "Who?" he choked out. "Who did they sell it to?" "Onyx Developments," I said. "Me." The room gasped. It wasn't a theatrical gasp. It was the sound of air leaving a balloon. I own the note on this building. Richard. I own the ground lease. I own the steel, the glass, and the air rights. I checked my watch, a deliberate mirror of the gesture he made 20 years ago in the foyer. And as of midnight, your payment is officially in default. I filed the foreclosure paperwork at 4:59 p.m. today. I looked at my mother. She had collapsed into a chair, weeping. Not for me. Not for the daughter she threw away. She was weeping for the house in the Hamptons, the country club membership, the social standing that was evaporating in real time. This is a hostile takeover, Trevor shouted, trying to rally. Security, get them off the stage. That's actually a great idea. Trevor, I said. I nodded to the back of the room. The doors swung open. It wasn't hotel security. It was my security team. And leading them was an older man with gray hair, broad shoulders, and a limp that came from 40 years of pouring concrete in the Chicago winter. Arthur. He wasn't wearing a grease-stained canvas jacket tonight. He was wearing a tailored suit, an earpiece, and the badge of the head of security for Onyx Developments. He walked down the center aisle, his eyes locked on Richard. My father looked at Arthur, confusion warring with panic. He didn't recognize him. Why would he? To Richard Sterling. Men like Arthur were just background noise. Labor, to be used and forgotten. But Arthur remembered him. Arthur remembered the shivering girl he found in the dark because of this man. Arthur climbed the stairs to the stage. He didn't shout. He didn't use force. He stepped up to Richard, towering over him. Mr. Sterling, Arthur said, his voice gravel and iron. Mrs. Sterling, you are trespassing on private property. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises. 5 minutes. I repeated. Use the service door. The symmetry of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Richard looked at the crowd. He looked for an ally, a friend, anyone who would step in. But the room was silent. The investors were already checking their phones, texting their brokers, distancing themselves from the fallout. The Sterling brand was toxic. Zahra, my mother wailed, reaching out a hand. Please. We're family. No, I said, turning away. You're tenants. And you've been evicted. Arthur placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. It was the weight of consequences. My parents, broken and humiliated, allowed themselves to be escorted down the stairs. They walked past the silent crowd, past the cameras capturing their ruin, and out the back door, into the cold night. Trevor scuttled after them like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. The doors closed. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat. Then, Noah stepped forward. He didn't gloat. He simply tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming, he said. The bar is open. Please. Enjoy the view. It looks much clearer from here. An hour later, the gala was winding down. The guests were leaving, whispering excitedly about the most dramatic night in Chicago real estate history. I didn't stay to network. I took the private elevator to the roof. The wind was whipping around the spire of the tower, cold and biting. But I didn't feel it. I walked to the edge of the parapet. The city sprawled out below us, a grid of amber and white lights. Noah was already there, leaning against the railing. He had 2 cups in his hands, not crystal champagne flutes. The lid of a steel thermos. Arthur saved some coffee, he said, handing me one. I took it. The steam warmed my face. It smelled like diesel and cheap roast. The same smell that had saved my life 20 years ago. Did we go too far? Noah asked, looking out at the skyline. I took a sip. I thought about the death certificate. I thought about the trash bag. I thought about the 10th grade girl freezing in the snow, terrified that her life was over before it began. No, I said. We didn't go too far. We just finished the job. We stood there in silence. Mother and son. Two ghosts who had refused to fade away. We owned the building beneath our feet. We owned the future. And for the first time in 20 years, the cold didn't bother me at all. Sometimes the people who are supposed to build you up are the ones who tear you down foundation first. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from scratch, share this story. Let's remind the world that the best revenge is a skyscraper built on the rubble they left behind.